I respect the life and work of legendary indie animator Bill Plympton, but I am not a big fan of his abrasive aesthetic, serving as a now terribly dated and self-complacent counter-answer to a Disney brand of mainstream beauty. With that said, I don't believe Cheating to be a good introduction to his legacy for possible newcomers. Plympton doesn't seem to be very capable in filling up a total running time that exceeds the 5 minutes mark, as the film dilutes itself with unnecessarily overprolonged sequences of both character interactions and visual metaphors, depicting their current emotional discoveries to a degree that eventually loses all creative impact, which is too bad because they tend to be decisively interesting to look at, with well-placed callbacks to classic impressionist and metaphysical paintings, giving them a sense of artistic grandeur. Despite the blatant padding, the digestive still manages to strike an appeasing balance between its overarching narrative, a lovey-dovey couple crushed apart by jealousy and doubt, and the consistently over-the-top escapades of cartoon slapstick and symbolism. Until the introduction of a plot device so bafflingly preposterous that utterly destroys the film's entire credibility, turning it into an unredeemable mess of wasted potential. It's especially a pity considering this is one of the very few hand-drawn animated features to come out of the American independent scenery, or any other scenery for that matter. The Fake is both the best film presented in the main competition and one of the most depressing ones to date. Of course, a South Korean film would be completely devoid of hope for humanity. It's an uncompromisingly bleak deconstruction of the means of faith, specifically between the idea that a fake belief can be preferable to an ugly truth depending on how one can be desperate about it, versus the idea of a possible truth moved by malicious and self-righteous intents that can destroy all hope. A con artist tricks a community on the verge of their figurative and literal apocalypse, a soon-to-be damned that will force them to leave their home, into believing a false prophet to make a profit. He is countered by a violent old boy-style reject that wants to unmask said hoax at all cost, and in doing so ends up destroying everything around him, especially his daughter. Finally, despite being the initial cause for all the mess, the con artist is ultimately unimportant in the great scheme of things, and the real dichotomy at play turns out to be between the extreme fanatic obsession of the false prophet caused by a blend of his naivete and guilty conscience, and the seemingly unstoppable, almost demonic fanatic obsession of the old boy guy, which collision will cause the metaphorical end of the world, as if the two of them were actually Jesus and the Antichrist, both symbolic roles the film wants to push them towards. Faith is both humanity's bane and blessing. The bloody history of mankind is here allegorized by the conflict between the two opposing forces clashing together in a destructive and self-destructive Shakespearean dance of death, moved by their own brand of fanatic conviction in which there are no right or wrong answers. It's just human nature at its worst.
J'ai reçu ta charmante lettre. Je l'ai lue plusieurs fois. Aziza, rejoins-moi vite.
Jasmine is a conceptually interesting narrative held back by a few executional hiccups. A claymation artist retells the tale of his relationship with an Iranian student back in the heyday of Khomeini's Muslim revolution, from its inception to its inevitable dissipation caused by the complicated social/political circumstances of the period. In a savvy use of his art, the director, whom is also the main character and the primary narrator, chooses to represent said story by creating clay models serving as a symbolic depiction of himself, his fiancée, and the rest of the Iranian populace, and placing them in a carton-built version of Tehran. The audience witnesses both the molding of the characters from the literal hands of the artist and the various back-and-forth transitions between the actual stop-motion animation segments and the fourth-wall-breaking live-action scenes pointing out the artifice of it all. This all serves as a subtle metatextual pointer to the romantic value we assign to our fondest memories, which in turn become more fictitious and artificial, but not any less valuable. Unfortunately, the film suffers from a few pacing problems, and the story could have probably been told more efficiently in 30 minutes or so, very personally speaking, mind you. This is a nicely done work altogether.
J'adorais le métier de mes parents, botaniste. J'adorais mélanger les plantes, les essences de fleurs. Je rêvais de fabriquer des potions magiques.
A horribly by-the-book, pandering, preachy, pro-environmental schlock with all the utterly irritating clichés you could possibly fathom. Quirky main character that's always in the right but would be proved to be an unstable psychopath in real life? Check. Corporations promoting the use of genetically modified organisms represented by a ridiculously cartoonish supervillain with a secret lair, minions wearing freaking tight suits, and an allergy to plant-generated oxygen? I kid you not? Check. The ongoing conflict between biological agriculture versus scientific enhancements reduced to an oversimplified "nature's good, modified food's bad" diatribe shoved onto our faces? Check! The first half of it is basically Fern Gully crossed with Captain Planet. And then there's the second half, which is where the film descends into mind-flattering levels of idiocy and it becomes legitimately entertaining. Imaging M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening on steroids. Again, I am not joking, folks. This really happens. Well, at least the animation looks pretty. It took them 7 years to make, you see. I know that because they were kind enough to let me know it during the end credits. Ugh. This is, hands down, one of the most hilariously bad films of the year. And I haven't even mentioned the talking plants yet. Here's the spiritual successor to Memories. Why, yes, Katsuhiro Otomo is involved. How would you guess? It was overall a fairly disappointing experience in its own right and doesn't hold a candle to the brilliance of the first multi-directed, multi-animated project. 4 stories are showcased, 3 of which are rather inconclusive and pretty rushed adaptations of classic Japanese legends and folk tales, all interesting at a visual level, but severely lacking in every other department. The last one, on the other hand, was a ferocious satire on modern warfare, the myth of a controlled battlefield, and the tragic irony on the very human concept of waging war in order to stop war. It easily manages to be far more effective and poignant than the bloated entirety of the Metal Gear Solid franchise. The ending alone is worth the price of admission. Still, one good element doesn't save the totality of a flawed product that clearly favored style over substance. At least it looked aesthetically pleasing, although the gorgeous animation they used for the opening credits easily overshadowed everything else.
Short piece.
Você está entrando numa das cidades mais seguras do mundo. Bem-vindo ao Rio de Janeiro.
Take the premise from Cloud Atlas, or any other grand humankind narrative spanning through multiple periods of time and generations, streamline and oversimplify the whole concept by having a linear and unchallenging tale from a distant past to a not-so-distant future, with an unengaging lead that's literally immortal, and you gain this sadly unimpactful and dull animation with lots of untapped potential. The film drowns itself in a sea of thematic relevancy, a depiction of the constant struggle of oppressed versus oppressor, from the age of colonialism to slavery to the last century's class rioting, that's deeply ingrained in the cultural folklore and history of the Brazilian nation. The main character himself is supposed to be the messiah of his ancient native tribe, locked in a continuing struggle against either invading Caucasian forces or a totalitarian regime, depending on the timeline. But it doesn't have the right push to make said themes stick. It feels forced, rushed, superficial, and it lacks a properly well-rounded lead. The animation itself also isn't very good or particularly interesting to look at, especially when it comes to portray battle scenes, which are very awkwardly filmed with epileptic close-ups in order to feebly mask the obvious inadequacies of the budget. This has really been a disappointing year for the main competition, hasn't it?